red dot. There it is. Hello, this is Eagle Gardens, Eagle Gardens 1 on Instagram, and this is fucking talking shit with Eagle, episode 419. Hopefully, you guys had a great Wednesday. I have got one great guest for you. Charm City Organics. You want to tell us how you're doing and, of course, where they can find you, my friend?
Hey, Eagle, doing great, man. Thanks for having me tonight. Super honored and happy to be here. Um, I'm accessible on Instagram right now. My Instagram page is at Charm City Organics, all spelled out. Uh, Check me out.
So usually we start this thing off with what got you into cannabis? What got you into cannabis? Where did cannabis enter your life, man?
Uh, I would say cannabis entered my life in college. I would say I was a junior, late sophomore, early junior in college, and friends who know me from that time would tell you prior to that, I was the friend who would guilt trip my friends about smoking weed. I would tell them how bad it was for them and all the horrible things that were going to happen to them. And I have a few friends to this day who remind me of the fact that I was that guy. Now that I grow, but I would say I was introduced to cannabis around that time in college, which tends to be the story for most people, I guess. But that was mine. So I was a late bloomer, of sorts.
So how do you go from I guess we'll call it that guy, your words. How do you go from that guy to a cannabis user? Well, I mean, what what made the change? What made the exception to the rule there?
I joke with people who don't smoke now, and I always say, don't smoke, you'll like it, right? And for me, it's truly no deeper than that, right? Like tried it and I enjoyed it. I've tried other things that I haven't enjoyed as much, and my intention, honestly, was never to learn how to grow cannabis. It kind of happened by chance. Uh, I ended up in DC where I am now, and it was legal, and I smoked. And the natural connection in your mind is, I want to learn, you know, how to grow because I smoke and it's legal, right? But I think like anybody who grows, that takes time. So for 2 years of having in my mind wanting to grow, I had roommates and not the most conducive living situation, right? Um, and so the first opportunity that I had to be able to grow, I took advantage of it. I had a little 2.5 by 2.5, I think by 4 foot tall tent. I put 3 little 1 gallon pots in it. Uh, that first little harvest came out like tea bags. I had the Mars Hydro, I call them Blurple, but we all know those purple LED lights that were famous five to 10 years ago. Um, and yeah, it's kind of just progressed from there, right? Like I was actually thinking about it earlier today, in advance of doing this with you. November will be 5 years since I put the first seed of my own in the ground, and or in a pot rather. November will be 5 years since I've been growing, and yeah, it's been a lot of for lack of better terms, growth, just in terms of just understanding the process, right? But the initial motivation was just, hey, I smoke, I enjoy smoking. I spend a lot of money buying weed from other people. I want to learn this craft for myself. It was really that simple.
So And those of you guys that aren't following him, you guys should, because he's got some really amazing stuff on there. You came a long way in 5 years, man. This garden looks on
Honestly,
point.
that's the biggest compliment, because there are a handful of people who've been like, who I've been following, who've been following me since like I first created my Instagram, right? And I know just recently I've had just a few people, give me that compliment, and that honestly is the biggest compliment to me, especially from other growers, because it just means a lot to me. So yeah, I appreciate that.
So, what were some of your first strains?
The very first strain that I grew was called, I think, Triple Purple Rhino. Don't get me to lying on the breeder. And I'd always had this obsession with purple strains. And even now, like if you go to my page, you see I have a few purple strains from Mass Medical. And for me, it was just um, always feeling like the purple weed that I smoked was never really good, right? I feel like everybody has smoked Granddaddy Purple at some point. I just never really remember, prior to growing and getting in the grow scene, smoking really good purple weed, right? So that was my first like motivation. And that's what I tell anybody who wants to start growing for the first time. I just tell them, like, find a strain that interests you. Perhaps something you smoked before that you really enjoy, that you want to smoke again because you can't find it, or something you never tried, right? But I always tell people, like, start with a strain that intrigues you, because you're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, right, growing this plant over these few months. You want to have something to look forward to. So that was my first strain. What I realized is, at that time, I truly knew nothing about genetics, like absolutely nothing. I think it took me time. I wouldn't consider myself a genetic snob, but I like very particular things for very particular reasons. Um, at that point, I really didn't know much about genetics. I would say getting introduced to Exotic Genetics, who I don't grow his seeds sort of every run, but I always have some of his seeds in my stable. Getting introduced to him, uh, um, uh, one person I'm going to shout out is DC Seed Exchange. Uh, some really good guys over there. Just meeting more growers really is what exposed me to better genetics. Made a lot of good friends in the area who would share clones. And so my genetics preference 5 years later has totally changed from where it was in the beginning. But I think that same sort of foundational approach is the same, just in terms of looking at it and saying, like, I always try to grow things that intrigue me, strains that I like, right? Maybe they're not the most popular strains, but they're strains that I like. And it served me well to this point, taking that approach.
So, has it always been organics for you?
Yeah, it has. Honestly, like, some of the soil, that is the one thing that hasn't changed. Obviously, I've learned more about soil building and different things like that as I've made new patches of soil. I've tried different things, but the basic way that I make my soil hasn't changed. And when I first sat down, started researching different ways to go about this, I said, in my mind said, I want to grow cleanest possible way, right? Next to being able to grow, outside in nature. And at that point, started doing some research on companies like Mountain Organics, Build a Soil. There's a local, where I am, there's a local company called Veterans Compost, where literally it's like a group of veterans who have this farm, and they make some really good compost. So I'm able to kind of source my compost locally, and yeah, that approach has always been the case. The only thing that's changed there is just sort of being able to scale up in certain ways as time has gone on. But the living soil, no till, approach is what I do, and I honestly wouldn't do it any other way, even if I could go backwards.
So you mentioned that you mix your soil. Do you mind sharing your recipe or
Yeah, no,
your
I don't
inputs
mind
with
at
me?
all. Honestly, I don't even call it my recipe, right? It really is just an iteration of what Build the Soil does. And I would say it is one of their earlier iterations. There's a guy, you can follow him on Instagram too. His name is The Real Big Worm Organics. He's a really good guy in the area who who actually makes soil far better than I ever can. And I actually buy his soil to top dress, as a supplement to my own. But my basic recipe is 1 part peat moss, 1 part lava rock, and 1 part compost. And I know some people start with mixing earthworm castings. When I'm building new soil, it's just a preference of mine not to start with earthworm castings. I like to put fresh worms in and just sort of allow them to do their thing. And I know that with the compost, there's already some earthworm castings in it. So I don't use earthworm castings. That's the point. And and I've adopted this from Big Worm and what he does. Lava rocks are great. I certainly don't recommend perlite. I know perlite as a aeration medium tends to sort of its life cycle is much shorter. Like if you ever go to the mall and you might look at the plants that are outside of the mall, or I don't know, some apartment building, and you'll see all the perlite on the top. And ultimately, like if that happens in your beds, your soil gets all compacted. You don't want to use perlite at the point. But rice hulls are really good as well. Rice hulls are really good as well as an aeration medium. So lately, I've been using half lava rock, half rice hulls. You can source, rice hulls organically pretty easily wherever you are. And uh, in terms of amendments and minerals, now keep in mind what I just described: the 1 part peat moss, the 1 part lava rocks, the 1 part compost. Um, uh, I use 30 gallons as an example. So, imagine starting with 4 cubic feet of soil as a minimum and sort of multiplying by there, right? So if 4 cubic feet is the minimum, the amendments that I would put in is a half cup of kelp meal, a half cup of neem meal, a half cup of crab meal, 2 cups of basalt, gypsum, and oyster shell flour, and that's all per cubic foot. And it sounds complicated, but to make it simpler is ultimately take your total, cubic feet, and for each cubic foot, you're doing a half cup each of kelp, neem, and crab, 2 cups of basalt, and a cup each of gypsum and oyster shell flour. And quite honestly, I used to just try to buy all the ingredients individually, and unless you're somewhere where you could just really source it locally for a good price, I know Build a Soil in particular sells these amendments pre-mixed. You literally just buy what you need for the amount of cubic feet of soil that you're building. And literally, I spread everything out on a tarp, shovel rake, and blend it up, right? Obviously, I've made 100 gallons of soil at once at a point, right? Which consumes a lot more time, and I've needed help, things like that. So if you could get like some mechanism to mix it for you, I've tried getting like a concrete mixer or something like that. I've not quite gone that far yet, but the idea is you want to blend it up really good, and I did a lot of research early on about like super soils and all that stuff. Like there's certain ingredients that you might hear historically, I guess, used in soil that aren't used here, like bat guano and stuff like that. And I know Build a Soil recommends even doing it this way, that you let the soil sort of rest for a week or whatnot. And in all of my experiences, I've built soil, I've put soil in pots, I've watered it and transplanted plants that same day. And, I've never had any adverse experiences. But I have a pretty significant amount of soil, just sort of sitting ready to top dress at any given moment when I need it. But that's basically what I do. 1 part peat moss, 1 part lava rock, and or rice hulls, 1 part compost, and then picturing, 4 cubic feet, 30 gallons, right? Of soil as your minimum, which is 4 cubic feet. There's, 7.5 gallons in a cubic foot. So whatever amount of gallons you're building, divided by 7.5, and that helps you calculate all this. And if you want to post this on your Instagram or something, I'll give it to you. But yeah, it's worked for me, man. The only other thing to do from that point is add some worms and cover crop and keep it watered.
But obviously, it's working. My question is about the rice hulls versus the lava rock. What would be the advantages of the rice hulls instead of the lava rock? Because in my what I see, and again, I'm not mixing my soil like this, but I would just. It seems like in the long haul, in a no-till situation, that they would break down and the aeration would collapse in time. Is that true, or am I thinking wrong?
I'll say that hasn't been my experience. I would say 98% of my soil is lava rock, right? And I use the rice hulls to the soil that has just the rice hulls in it to top dress. I've done that, just a few times as a supplemental layer to lay down a few more cover crops. But I mean, to your point, yes, I instinctually would defer to lava rock. I mean, I have some of the soil that I have is legitimately as old as the time that I've started growing, and I've been making it the same way. And I find the lava rocks and or the P rocks, right? But the rocks essentially to work the best in terms of aeration. So I if I had to choose one, I would certainly go with the lava rock.
So, yeah, it sounds like overall a pretty complete recipe. Yeah,
It works,
I'm
man.
sitting here
It
listening
works.
to it. I couldn't.
It works. And obviously, I think with this sort of system, it's important to have a good IPM program down, right? I mean, that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. Like most growers, when you wake up one morning and your plants are covered in spider mites, which I chopped down and threw away. But I use sort of one IPM regimen. I like Mountain Organics tonics. They work really well for me. I also use the Dr. Zymes, which really works well. And I will occasionally, with the tonics from Mountain Organics, add Karanja and or neem oil. I know people don't like neem oil. I use it sparingly because I do know it tends to stick around a little longer. So I try to use it in the earlier weeks of veg, and then the Karanja, and then sort of later as I'm approaching flower, not using any oils at all, just the tonics. And that's just been a practice of mine. But IPM 1 to 2 times a week. I can't stress that part enough. There are a lot of good companies that make a lot of good products. I would say even in a hydroponic system, anything foliar wise, I think should always be organic. And there are enough companies, particularly like Mountain Organics and Build the Soil, who make some good products and sell good products from other companies that are all organic.
So, you want to let us in on possibly some training techniques for veg there? I mean, it looks like you really do a little bit of training on these ladies to
Yeah, man.
maximize your yields.
This was certainly my best training effort thus far. I think having these lights, the new lights that I put up from timber grow lights. The Cypress 8s were really good. But literally, what I decided, you know, my ceilings aren't that tall. My ceilings aren't even 8 feet tall. So I said to myself, I have to obviously try to get my canopy as even as possible, growing a few different strains in the bed. But I have to judge when I'm going to flower more by height than time. And so I said to myself, I want to train the plant so that the canopy is completely level by the time they get to, you know, this height. And that's essentially where I put the first layer of you know, trellis netting up. And I know, you know, I've done a lot of reading on when and how different growers top. Obviously, I wait until the plant's, you know, big enough, at least, you know, 5 or 6 nodes before I top. But I just sort of judge my topping based on height. If I think the plant is at a sufficient enough height where I'll top it, I'm going to top it. Because what I noticed, especially with clones, even growing the same strain, you know, different clones are at different heights. They grow at different paces. You know, that just tends to happen. And I've gotten pretty good with super cropping. I used to break some branches off every time I tried to do it. And now I've gotten to a place where I'm not doing that. But I pretty much put a layer of netting up. And I said to myself, I am going to train every single plant in this bed, either, you know, topping or super cropping as much as I need to get it to fill in. And honestly, and this is just a testament to the bed itself, like it's 300 gallons of soil in the 4x8 grow bed. It's roughly 300 gallons of soil in the 4x8 grow bed. I use, you know, the Blue Mats watering system. In terms of microbes, you know, I know there are a lot of companies out there. I prefer Rootwise Soil Dynamics. They make one recipe for veg, another for flower. I topped the plants once, exactly one time, and I super cropped some of them that I thought needed to be super cropped. And I mean, everything pretty much filled itself out within 4 weeks. I'm not even exaggerating there. I mean, part of that is all the strains, with the exception of 3 of the 5 strains that I'm running, are strains that I've grown before. Another strain was, you know, from a batch of seeds that I popped. Another was, you know, given to me by a buddy. But everything pretty much filled itself out in no time. I mean, it just kind of happened. I'm not even being, you know, funny here. I didn't do anything too special. Like, I super cropped once. I topped once, and I super cropped, you know, branches where I felt like they needed to be. So, you know, having grown in pots within tents and things like that, I encourage people, like, if you can get a room, you know, if you can just get a little room set up and get a decent grow bed, man, they kind of do the work themselves. Honestly, they really do. You keep it watered, you keep it pest free. It takes care of itself. I'm serious.
Now, when putting together a bed like that for the long term, oh, is there a certain depth you should start out with? I mean, should, you know, 6 to 8 inches be significant? And how much room, you know, looking ahead, should you leave yourself for things like top dressing and whatnot?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember I asked that same question when I initially bought the bed. What I was told was the bed is, I think, 4 feet by 8 feet by 18 inches deep, I think. And what I was told was leave 2 inches, leave 2 inches, leave 2 inches, essentially, you know, fill it up to only 16 inches. I want to say even doing that, it wasn't quite even, it was still lower than that, if that makes sense. Like, it's almost like I always say to myself, when I buy a 30-gallon pot,
it always takes a little more than 30 gallons worth of soil to actually fill it, right? And I think even putting in the amount of soil that I put in, this bed is like 2 years old. So with every run, you know, I've been able to top dress a very thin layer of soil, a very thin layer of soil, and it not completely, you know, the bed's not toppling over, right? Like there's still sufficient enough space to be able to top dress every run. Um, um, I would just always say make a little more soil than you need, have somewhere to keep some extra soil, and, you know, always leave yourself just a little bit more space in your pots. I just think that's prudent. And I've always sort of taken that approach. So I didn't quite measure it, but I would say I certainly left myself some room uh, to add soil, while obviously, you know, having enough soil in it that it does what it's supposed to do. And they're very easy to put together. You know, you get a PVC pipe cutter, some measuring tape, and you know, for this one you would kind of need a second hand, but they're not very complicated. They're very intuitive.
Another thing you said earlier on that kind of struck my raised an eyebrow with me was the compost instead of the earth castings. Now
That's a preference. That's a preference.
I'm kind of getting into the organics. You know, I'm a long term grower. I've been growing for 20 years, and I started out in like a bag soil, but where I was growing was too heavy. Ended up into, you know, a cocoa. I ended up in cocoa. Bottom line, I ended up cocoa for many years, and I'm kind of retransitioning back into the organics. And so the last few runs, Smiley's Garden, who was in the chat, was nice enough to, you know, set me up with some earth boxes and kind of set me up on the right path, we'll say. And so they're on their second or third run. I'm actually loading them up for their third run. And instead of like top dressing with earthworm castings for my next round, I've chosen the last two rounds to use a compost instead. Last round seemed to work fine, so that's the recipe I'm going with this round. So it's kind of interesting to see somebody, you know, suggest compost.
Yeah. And, you know, like in that 4x8 grow bed, even with worms, like once the worms are added to it, you know, I mean, those worms are breeding, right? Like they're breeding, they're eating everything and whatnot. And for me, I just sort of have always looked at it and just said, well, the worms are going to ultimately create the castings. And while I know they're good, I know that I'm buying really good compost from a really good place that has, you know, it's really good compost with worm castings already in it, essentially from how it's being made. You know, back to the soil recipe, just really quickly. One thing I would emphasize is, you know, don't skimp on your compost. Don't just buy compost from anybody. Don't just go anywhere and get it. Sure, you can get the peat moss and lava rock at Home Depot, and you can order the amendments online. But I know from a cost benefit sort of analysis perspective, compost, to get enough of it, you know, to order it online would be very expensive. And so that's the one thing I would always encourage people to try and source locally. You know, I think there are enough good people around the country who are probably making some good compost. But I'm fortunate that I found a really good compost vendor locally, because I know that in the times that I've made soil, you know, sure, ordering the amendments online is one thing. You know, you can easily go to the hardware store, you know, the Home Depot, and buy lava rock and peat moss. But to have had to order the volume of compost that I've used online without having the option to get it locally would have been, you know, a crazy amount of money. So that's the one thing I would encourage anybody, you know, if you're looking to build your own soil, just Google, you know, try to find a local compost vendor.
So when we're talking about IPM and whatnot, I kind of find that as far as IPM goes, defoliation can be a good friend of during as well as IPM. You know, cleaning up all the older shit, the bigger leaves, things where things can hide uh, nightly or daily while I'm watering, and definitely before any kind of IPM. It's helps greatly. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. So it's funny, the defoliation piece is something that I obviously, like most people, I think focus more on in flower. I always defoliate around day 21, really at day 21. And I know some people defoliate twice. I tend to only do it once. Um, in veg, I try to judge it just based on what you're saying. Some plants tend to be leafier than others. I've I've learned with the certain strains as I run them from time to time that a defoliation at a certain point in veg has helped. I've figured out with certain strains doing it has been adverse. Um, um, what I always sort of try to focus on in terms of defoliating is obviously after I transplant a plant, if there's some dead or dying leaves, anything that looks like it's dead or dying, not getting any light, obviously once the plants start elevating more, I try to get rid of any underbrush, right? At a certain point. But what I focus on in flower more than anything is just any leaves that are blocking bud sites, right? I'm at least confident enough in my IPM regimen throughout veg that by the time I get to flower, I don't have to do it. I'll say I stop vegging. I stop IPMing right around day 7. And I'm always sort of very prudent in that early flower stage. So I will sort of IPM again twice that week versus once. But yeah, you don't want so many leaves that you don't see bud sites, but I would also caution defoliating too early because you could also stunt, the plant's growth. And so if you anticipate vegging somewhere around 4 or 5 weeks, I would say, I wouldn't defoliate anything any earlier than halfway through. And even then, particularly in veg, I would defoliate very sparingly. And again, I am just always very conscious of not wanting to defoliate to the point where the plant's growth is stunted. But also, not have the plant focus so much on growing leaves versus, bud sites and having pest issues and whatnot. So it's a fine line is what I would say. And it's something I'm still learning, even though I think I've had some pretty good experiences.
So let's see here. Do you clone or do you grow from seed?
Both. I try to get one seed running a year. My space is very small. And so to pheno hunt, obviously, occupies a little more time, a little more space. But I do know how to clone. Mass Medical Strains, who I have a pretty good relationship with, I actually sort of owe my cloning knowledge to him. My approach is very simple. I have the Oxy cloner. I know there are different aeroponic cloners that people use. I prefer the Oxy cloner. it's very intuitive. There are no misters. There's nothing to really clean. There's an air stone and there's a submersible water pump. And I've found the 24 watt water pump to work a little better. I think they give you an air pump that's not quite that big, but anything that's like 24 watts around a 800 GPH works really well, because you only need, in the 20 site cloner, you only need one air stone. And literally all I do is I take my cuts, I'll soak them in a little bit of a tonic from Mountain Organics for, just a few minutes. I cut them at that, 45-degree angle. Take a razor blade, I splice the middle a bit, and then literally you leave it in the cloner. I mean, you put it in, you leave it. There's a line that shows you where to fill the water. And what I do, because obviously, especially in, the winter months, or the summer months rather, obviously you have that water pump running with the air stone. So you imagine the water can get a little warm. And you don't want the water to get too warm, because then you run the risk of root rot and all those things. So what I tend to do is, as I see the water level decreasing, I tend to just use ice to refill it. So I'll put, ice in versus just water, and let the ice melt as a way of just sort of cooling the water. And I'll say if 20 clones are taken, I may lose one or two. Just due to maybe they weren't the biggest clone, or perhaps, the water got a little too warm for it. But I've had a very successful clone rate doing that. And I always keep a few for myself. I'm actually in the process of attempting my first breeding project with a male that I've selected, and with, phenos that either I selected or were given to me by friends. But yeah, cloning used to be very daunting for me. Even when I sort of felt confident as a grower, I didn't know how to clone. And, I knew in terms of wanting to get into breeding and taking that next step, that was something I had to learn. And so, hey, find what works for you. I have buddies who refuse to use a aero cloner, right? They prefer the traditional, rock wool or the easy clone plug or whatever, right? But you find what works for you in terms of cloning. But I certainly think it's an important skill to pick up as a grower. I mean, in addition to just knowing how to do it, the benefits I feel are, you're able to keep phenos around that you want to have. We all know, right, that growing from clone, you can speed things up a little bit more versus growing from seed, right? And again, my motivation for really wanting to learn it was knowing that I ultimately wanted to be able to breed my own plants, and knowing that would be pretty hard to do without knowing how to clone plants. And yeah, I try to approach everything I'm doing with this the right way. And so for me, my focus is just, it's almost like a standard operating procedure where I don't want to cut any corners. And it's not really to prove anything to anyone other than myself, to be able to say, like, I didn't just, take a pack of seeds and pick a male and female and breed them. But no, like, I ran that pheno 3 or 4 times in a row and cloned it and recloned it and re-vegged it, and, tested it every way possible to see if it was a strain actually worth keeping, in addition to people just saying they like it, right? And yeah, I take a certain amount of pride in that at this point, because I know what I'm attempting to do now, I could have done it earlier. I just wouldn't have been doing it the right way. And I say that not because my intentions were bad then, but I didn't know what I knew now, right? And that progression, I think I'm ready to sort of take to the next level and use some of these awesome phenos I feel like I've been able to collect and make some seeds, and hopefully people will want them.
Nice. I hope that works out for you, my friend.
I'll be sure to send you some when the time comes.
I'll be on there, my friend. I also use that oxycloner, and
it's the best one. I've tried so many others. It's the best one. It really is.
I agree.
The only thing I recommend, the pump that it comes with, it's good for the first use. I wouldn't use it a second time. It just seems to weaken out. But I went to the Good Hope Hydroponics, which is here in DC, and I bought this little Bible Sun pump. And what I noticed was I bought a new oxycloner. And then I had an older one, but I didn't use the same pump because it didn't work. So I went and I bought a new pump. And what I noticed was the clones that I had taken them about 3 or 4 days before. The clones that I had taken with the new oxycloner didn't root as fast as the clones that I took with the old oxycloner, but the new pump. And that's what sort of made me realize you need that stronger pump in there, because all it's doing is creating humidity, right? So the faster you can move that water, the more humid it can become, and the faster the roots develop, right? But that was just a note, and this was maybe my 5th or 6th time using it. So that was just a mental note that I noticed. You want to buy a stronger pump for it, and I swear it'll speed that rooting time up even faster.
I've oversized my pump as well, so you definitely that there. One tip I'd like to pass along that I have found with mine. I appreciate the ice too. Another thing I do during the summer months, differently than most people that I know with the oxycloner, is I put it on a timer. Both pumps are on a timer.
Okay.
15 minutes on, 15 minutes off, to put less heat in there. That one, especially the one inside the oxycloner, because it never shuts off. That motor are constantly adding a little bit more heat, little more heat, little more heat. So if it turns on, turns off, it gives it leaves a little bit of the heat, constant heat there. And then the other thing that I do during the summer months is, because I run a bigger pump just like yourself, is I set that thing on the concrete. So the air that it's drawing in is as cool of air as it can possibly be, pulling in. Helps as well. So those two things right there, it's, really, because the summer months and the oxycloner can be a little bit of a challenge, but man, a couple little tips like that has really improved my summertime cloning game for sure.
Mm-hmm. No, and I'm gonna take you up on that, because I know I'll clone at least one more time this summer. So I'll keep that in mind for sure.
So we're pretty much at the end of veg. Is there any teas involved here, either in veg or in flower?
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time.
Sorry, I muted myself. We've talked ourselves pretty much through veg here. Mm-hmm. And so we're pretty much getting ready to flip. Is there any teas involved here? Either one last one, or through veg or in flower that you use?
Yeah, so it's funny, right? Like some people say compost tea every week, and I don't. I do it. I compost tea maybe once a month. And what I'll say is, in veg, the only thing different that I do in veg versus in flower is, and I swear by this product, Build a Soil sells this pumpkin extract. And I've tried a few of their different products. I mean, I've tried all their products, a lot of their products. in addition to plain water, all right, like in addition to just plain water, in veg, all I use is the occasional coconut water, Microbe Complete from Root Rise Soil Dynamics, and the tonics from Mountain Organics, and the occasional compost tea. Nothing else. In flour, I use the Build a Soil, Build a Bloom once a week. I use the Rootwise Biofuss once every other week. And I did it once. I'm at day 50 almost. I've done it once this flower cycle where I used the Build a Soil pumpkin extract that I added to my compost tea. Aside from that, man, it's mostly just keeping the blue mats filled and plain water. Just the plain water from the blue mats. But I know there's some people who exclusively use plain water. All of these amendments, all these additives rather are all organic. And I've seen benefits in terms of not using them, right? And it's a very simple program. It doesn't require too much. I'll do one compost tea or maybe two throughout a flower run. And I'm using the Build a Soil, Build a Bloom once a week, the Rootwise Biofuss once every other week. And in veg, I do it every week, but in flower, I do it sparingly where I use, the Mountain Organics tonics. But yeah, aside from that, it's just keeping the blue mats filled. And again, a lot of that is just a testament to the soil, right? Once your soil is moist and you've gotten a good compost tea in it, and you get your microbes introduced, and your worms are doing their work, and you top dress as you're supposed to, and when you defoliate, you create your mulch layer. It helps and it works. Yeah.
So they're asking in chat, who makes the pumpkin extract and what is it at? Why are you at it?
So I use it. It's from Build a Soil. Build a Soil makes it, and they've not steered me wrong since. And when I read about it, it made sense. What it said was, essentially, they used the pumpkin, and I don't want to misquote it because I don't have the webpage up in front of me. But it's essentially it's a flowering enhancement, right? I know that I've had the experience sometimes of when your plants in veg in particular, your plants for some reason are like yellowing or something's going on, and a good compost tea will fix it. And it is nothing more, at least in my mind, it's my best way of understanding it. It's nothing more than just a little bit extra, right? It's just a little bit extra to your compost tea to help your plants in that flowering stage. And have I been able to look at my plants this run and say, like, I see a noticeable difference? No. I mean, I think the plants are just looking just as good this run as they did last run, but the lights are better this run. But I felt like it was worth a shot. It was worth a try, using the pumpkin extract. And I think the way they explain it just made a lot of sense. Actually, while we're talking, it can't be that hard to find the page. I'll tell you. All right. So here's what they said. And it sold me. All right. So since starting Build the Soil, we've been preaching DIY techniques. This particular fermented plant extract is made from pumpkins, along with the whole plant. I assume they mean a whole plant of cannabis. And all the information we have about fermenting your own extract suggests that you should start with the part of the plant that you wish to grow. For instance, if you wish to get faster vegetative growth, you would ferment fast-growing green leaves to feed your plants. However, if you wish to grow bigger flowers, you should ferment flowers to feed your plants. Is with this idea, we fermented pumpkin plants and flowers to be used as an all-natural bloom booster for your garden. And hey, a half gallon costs $40. So I said, that sounds like it's worth a try. So
They're asking in chat, how long do you brew it for?
About 36 hours is how long I brew my compost tea. And so my light cycle is off. I do 11 hours on, 13 hours off. And so knowing that I need to brew it for 36 hours, I will try to typically do it so that when the lights go off 36 hours before they come on, I'll start the tea so that I can get that watering in when the lights come on, once they reach that 36-hour time frame. Some people say 24. I would say don't let it go any longer than 36, but I let it brew for a day and a half.
Thank you for sharing. So as we march on here through the growing process, any tips through training through 1 through 3? Any cleaning up the skirt there, or any other training goes on 1 through 3?
Honestly, no. I've always been hesitant to defoliate on day one. I know some people do. I don't. If I see really huge low-hanging fan leaves and little knick-knack bud sites that I know won't amount to anything, I might just get rid of those. But as I'm starting veg, I truly don't flower for the first time. And defoliate for the first time until day 21. I'm certainly willing to hear different perspectives on it. It's just a preference, and it served me well doing it that way. When there's a guy on Instagram, his Instagram name is Cron Don Grows, I believe. And when I really didn't understand anything about how to defoliate, I just reached out to him, sent him a DM, asked him a few questions. He was, gracious enough to respond. And I know in his case, he recommends doing it either day 1 and 21 or day 21 and 45, I believe. And for me, I just sort of looked at 21 as being the common number and said, I'm just going to do it at day 21. And now that I'm, say, at day 50, right, if I notice that there's a certain fan leaf that's blocking a bud site, I'll get rid of it. And so I, trim here and there sparingly, but I really only do one major defoliation.
So and none even near the end there. I know I like to make my trimming a little bit easier, and I go in and I defoliate pretty hard during the final week.
But let me ask,
Not
right?
even that.
Because I'm not a know-it-all at all. I have heard at least that you shouldn't do that, or people. Let me not say shouldn't. I've heard at least in the instances where people don't do that, they don't do it because the fan leaves preserve and protect, the bud and the trichomes during the dry phase. Now, obviously, I'm not drying anywhere where anything's rubbing up against my bud, but I guess I'm asking, in your experience, right? If I can ask you a question, in your experience, has that worked? Like, you just literally just defoliate everything again right before you harvest?
I have always defoliated pretty hard, and I dry against conventional means currently, to be honest with you. I actually use a dryer, and when it when I was offered the chance to use it, I was ready to honestly just kind of tear it apart. But it worked and it worked well. So yeah, I de-leaf pretty hard. Now, with that being said, uh, I have hung dry, and even at then, I did wet trim as pretty close to the bud as I could, and then I would hang it, and then pretty much as it dried, to where I could snap the stem, I would de take the sticks out and let it dry a little bit longer, and then I'd jar up and start my cure process. But then again, as I'm venturing down this organic road, this is my opinion on what you're saying there. Um, Plants obviously aren't dead when we make that chop.
Right.
Would you agree with that? I mean, you take
No, no, absolutely.
cut it, give it, it'll survive for another week. So obviously, uh, it's fighting for life for to the day it's that last morsel moisture is gone, in my
Right.
opinion.
Right.
So I don't think in that long-term 60-60 cure that it's a necessarily a benefit of the leaves coming down and surrounding the buds and holding the turfs as much as I think there's nutrients, like you're saying, kind of instead of being sitting in that water with a little bit of nutrients. I think it's gimping along and changing and kind of curing on its own through the moisture in the leaves, the moisture and nutrients in the leaves.
Mm.
So I can honestly see that to this day, as I'm venturing down the organics road, as a benefit. To be honest with you, maybe them leaves are surrounding it as well and holding in some terms, but I think it's moreover that you're still providing some type of water, moisture, nutrients to them buds to take them through their final stage of maturity. And but with that being said, too, as far as way I harvest and everything else, I go again against what everybody else does a little bit more. I actually like to let my plants go to full maturity while they're standing. Pretty much, I like to see all the hairs turn or a good portion of them turn uh, before I take that thing down. I'm not expecting anything to change during the drying process. It's pretty much done. And as far as it, and I don't even scope the trichomes anymore, but if I were to, they would definitely be on the heavier amber side for sure.
Yeah.
Just because in that last phase there, people just reach for ways to make their buds more dense. Well, a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't realize in that later phase there that through that final ripening stage, there's a final swell. You know what I mean? And buds swell right up during that final ripening stage. So when when I go in at that point and de-leaf that final week, there's not much left to be done there, in my opinion. So, yeah, even at that point, I do leave. But then again, that just relates to my drying process. I know I'm going to trim her wet real close and then throw her into the dryer. So that's just my process.
No, no, I hear you. Hey, listen, I know I haven't been growing as long as you, but I have certainly learned the value in not rushing it, right? And like, I'll be honest, I've gotten away from using the trichome telescope and all that stuff too. But I'm also, like you say, willing to bet how they would look toward the end. And I've seen the difference between cutting a string down to day 56 versus 64, right? It makes a difference. And I tend to try to let mine go a little longer than even what's recommended. Not to the couch lock length, but to give them just a little more time. I have one more question for you, since we like going back and forth on this. What do you provide? Do you leave the plants in complete darkness for any amount of time at the end of harvest? What's your outlook on that?
I've been asked that as well, and no, I don't. I don't.
Mhm.
I have tried it once and twice, I believe, and no big difference. I'm more worried about leaving here in a higher humidity state and in the darkness. Darkness is when molds take off and thrive. So
Yeah.
I'm yeah worried
Yeah,
about.
I have a pretty good size industrial dehumidifier that I set at 45 every night, right? Because it's a pretty small room. It's like about a 12 by 16-foot room, right? So it's not that small, but it's small. Uh, but it gets super humid, right? The humidity will shoot up to 90%, 80, 90% in no time without that thing. So um, I've only ever had one plant mold throughout my entire time. It was a little autoflower of Jack Herer that I put inside of a tent. This is after I built out my first little room. And what I thought, at least in my mind, was it's an autoflower. I don't need to put a fan in the tent. And I grew this thing all the way through. I mean, it was nice and chunky. And I looked one day and it had completely molded on the inside. I had to cut pretty much the entire plant off. Um, and I learned you got to put a fan in every tent, no matter what strain it is. Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So, how is your drying process?
No,
Take
same
us
as you.
through.
Literally, same as you. I try to give it 2 weeks. I don't try to give it 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I'll typically start trimming on that 13th night just to give myself a head start with whatever plant or whatever branches I feel like have dried the most to that point. Um, Thankfully, like in my home, I have a basement bathroom that's pretty ideal, and so I have I need the humidifier in there. I'll keep the humidifier in there. Pretty much leave the inline fan that's in the bathroom running. I have an AC unit, so obviously when I harvest in the next few weeks, I'll need to use that. So I'll run the ducting out the window, turn the AC unit on. But yeah, 60 degrees, 60% humidity for 2 weeks. Um, I don't see any other way around that process. I think if you don't do it that way, you're kind of selling yourself short in the end, right? Especially if you've grown some good bud. I think I have learned the hard way. Drying it is just as important as growing it. Drying and curing it is just as important as growing it. And if you get that part wrong, it may not matter how well you grew it. So yeah, just like you, 60% humidity, 60 degrees, 2 weeks. I trim everything. At that point, I jar it. Um, Burp my jars twice a day for the first week or so. I'll let them, I burp them for about 15 minutes twice a day. After that, I try to do it for like 15 minutes once a day for the next week. And then by that third week, you know, I'm burping them every other day or so. Um, I don't have a room where I can put everything in bins and whatnot, but I do have a little cure door that I bought recently that the last run was my first time using it. And honestly, I swear by it. It keeps your bud at the perfect temp and humidity. I know some people use those humidity packs, and obviously, especially in the summer months, if your stuff is just in jars sitting for hours, even that 15-minute burp twice a day may not be sufficient enough. Um, so I'm not running any issues with mold or anything at that point, right? After that 2 week dry, trim everything, and I'm curing it for a good 3 weeks before doing anything with it.
So I'm also kind of really curious here, especially as you started later with cannabis, and You know what's funny? You could answer this, and you don't answer this. But this is the only reason I can honestly see at that point in life, kind of take it on campus. Did it have something to do with the girl?
It did, oddly enough. Yes. The short answer is yes. It did. It did. I started to say that in the beginning. I started to say that when I was telling the story, but it just sounded a little conceited. But no, it did. It did. It did.
That's fun. I appreciate the answer. So my next question is, would you express how you felt before, and once you tried it, and it wasn't that bad. You know, it's one aspect to use it in the way you feel about cannabis, as far as consumption. But when you took on uh, cultivation of the plant, did your thoughts and attitude? How did your thoughts and attitude change about the plant and the use consumption after you started?
Oh man, it totally changed my perspective, right? Because I mean, I don't want to make it sound as if you don't know how to grow weed, you don't really appreciate it, right? Or cannabis. If you don't really know how to grow cannabis, you don't appreciate it. I don't want to, draw that line in the sand, but I'll say in my case, like I didn't really appreciate like cannabis until I started growing cannabis, right? I mean, before that, it was just like, oh, I can get some weed and get high with my friends and have a good time. And, growing cannabis is something that like requires time on my part, work, energy, effort, money. And to do it right requires like, focus and attention to detail and all those things. So like, I don't want to sound too high level and philosophical, but in a lot of ways, it kind of like forces you to be disciplined, right? You have to be kind of disciplined to grow good cannabis. It takes months, right? 3 to 4 to 5 months to do it the right way. It takes effort every day in between, right? That time to make sure your plants are watered and your IPM is done and all those things. And hey, like I'm sure every grower at some point has slacked and you know, oftentimes that slacking it manifests, right? Like you remember you didn't IPM for 2 weeks in a row, and now you're wondering why you're having pest issues, right? But when you do it the right way, when you check every box and you're meticulous and all those things, like I don't know, for me, there's nothing more rewarding than like smoking my own weed, right? And not only smoking my own weed, but like smoking my own weed after perhaps smoking weed from other people that just is not as good as my own weed, at least not to me, right? Um, I don't know. I don't know. I know there are plenty of people who do things that gratify them, right? But next to like literal farming or like literally, I don't know what else in my mind I can compare to like you doing something like this and rewarding yourself after so long, right? Like, I mean, short of like building a house, I guess. But I say all that to say, like, no, the reward is always in like just the process for me. I enjoy like gardening, right? It's therapeutic of sorts. And yeah, yeah.
It is, man. I've almost crossed the board. Growers that I've talked to, uh, once cultivating, it has changed them. It is across the board. I've seen that. I almost think that it cultivates us as we cultivate it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of not one person across the board. And I guarantee you, it's no miracle, and there's some exceptions to the rule, no less. But I can't think of one that in not in one way through cultivation, and it hasn't made some type of betterment in person. You know,
Yeah.
as it goes on, it just makes you, want to do better as a gardener. And then as it just turns around in some way or another, you don't even realize it. It's pulling you along as a person, making you a better person as well. And then I found it, truly, and this is no lie or no lie at all. Once it, because I was headed down that road to anyways, but once I opened that organic road, man, I really found a true spiritual connection with growing and organics, and just the whole symbiosis of all through it all with us and the plant and life in general. It's incredible, really.
No, listen, I couldn't agree more, right? And I think part of what you're saying, part of the reason why that's true is it's sort of inherently built in the process, right? Like, I've never met a grower who said, "Oh, you know what? My last run, that was my best run ever. I'm never going to do better than that." Right? Like, no matter who I follow on Instagram, from the little home grower with 20 followers to the big famous grower with 100,000 followers, like, everybody's motivation is cool. Like, I just killed that run, and my next run is going to be better than that run, right? And I think that is intrinsically sort of built into the process of growing cannabis. Like, you always want the next run to be better. And so, like, subconsciously, the more you do it, it's like you want other things to be better, right? So no, I say all that to say I agree with you. Still there? Oh, I didn't know what happened.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Of course, the one time that I don't go over the emergency procedure, every so often I have some problem with my internet, and it randomly goes down. And of course, this being a great episode, why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it go down in the middle of the episode? So I jump back on from my phone to try to kind of save things. And thank you for being so patient to hang out while I got things going. So sorry for the interruption, my friend.
No worries, no worries, no worries.
So I don't know where I fell out. So I guess we just try to regroup here a little bit. I know we were talking about how the plant changes us as we cultivate. Yeah, but that's without being said, I guess. So let's just move on. Sorry about the awkward change up here.
Nah, dude, no worries. Trust me, no worries at all. Shit happens.
Completely embarrassed. Completely embarrassed. So, do you do anything as far as with your trim and stuff? Do you make any kind of bubble hash, edibles, lotions, anything of that sort?
Honestly, I personally do not, but I have friends who do. So I have a friend who, like, literally every harvest, she comes over, man, and I mean, she is a trooper. Like, she will sit for days on end and help me trim, right? Like, I'm super, super, super thankful for her. But she does her own little edible thing, and I'll typically just give her uh, all the trim at the end of her helping me trim all of my weed.
and I'll let her do whatever she wants with it. Honestly, that's typically how that goes.
Are you there, sir?
Yep.
All right.
I'm here.
Get the computer back. Get the computer back up and running. So, where do you plan to go in your cannabis journey here?
You know, man, that's a good question, right? I think all of us obviously want to be rich and aspire to scale up. For me, man, if I could be in any position, you know, I really want to obviously graduate to more space. But, you know, my ambition at this point is, you know, I really want to take all the knowledge that I feel like I've been able to accumulate both in growing and even not so much in terms of just having genetics, but in terms of knowing genetics. And, you know, I really want to focus a lot of my energy on making really, really, really good genetics. Sure, it is my hope to have, you know, my genetics hopefully at the point at which they're developed be synonymous with some of the best on the market. And that doesn't necessarily have to come with the popularity, but the quality. If I could be in any position, man, I'd love to just have a bunch of land, grow a bunch of weed, and be in a position that if I ever were to say operate a dispensary, I want to be in a position to supply my own dispensary. You know, here in DC, the dispensary scene is it's very weird to me. You know, I think cannabis industry as a whole in a lot of places is just in a very gray area. And I just think until it's federally legal, right, everywhere, no matter what any locality says, right, until you can go and you can smoke weed the way you can buy cigarettes, there's always going to be a black market. And, you know, I'm young, right? I'm only in my 30s, but I would say, you know, in my lifetime, there will always be people like us, the home growers, people who, you know, grow weed and sell it to their friends. Because I think there's a certain appreciation for the craft, right? I have a buddy who brews beer in his home, and he is able to sell those beers to various bars around DC who just appreciate the fact that this is craft beer, right? They don't care that he made it in his home. It passed all the health and safety checks that it needs to. But I think people will always appreciate like the craft, right? And so for me, I just, in any position I want to be in, I want like for my craft to be appreciated, be it through genetics, be it through growing. And I think like that's the focus. People will appreciate it.
So, is there any, you know, basically when you have a dream, you've got to start, you know, laying it to paper, seeing the vision at some point. Is there already a first strain in mind?
There is. There is. So in short, I have a male that I selected from Mount Organics. It's their Citron 2.0 strain, a collaboration that he did with a guy who I know is like working with him now, J Ball Mob. and just a stud male that I was able to select. And of the females that I have selected, I have Florida Sunrise from Jungle Boys, Putang Pop Art, Indigo Pupil, all from Mass Medical strains. Cherry Gasm, which was a strain given to me by a friend from Subcool. And yeah, those are the strains that I'm going to use to create my first crosses. I have names in mind for each one, but I won't share that just yet. gotta make them first before I name them. But yeah, man, you know, these are phenos that either I selected or were given to me. But all strains that I like. You know, all crosses that I'm being very intentional about. And after that first batch, you know, we'll see what happens. Start mixing in new phenos and F2 and some things. But yeah, I'm very, 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 very excited to go about doing it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Do you plan on working with starting everything from seeds and doing your own pheno selecting for mom and pop, or kind of from partly by clone with an established mother?
At the point at which I start, at the point at which I have the seeds, I would certainly want to grow them myself, obviously, and you know, share them with some friends to test some things out, make sure, you know, the phenos are actually stable. I mean, you know, it could happen that, yeah, this male looks good and this female is awesome, but they don't produce stable genetics, right? So again, I think that's just part of the intention behind it and doing things the right way, which is even after the seeds are done, I'm going to be very intentional about testing before I try and sell anything, right?
Well, I think I maybe misphrased my question a little bit. Basically, what I was saying is when you're putting the strain together and you're looking for like mom and pop, do you plan to, you know, find whatever strains you're planning to cross and then start them, you know, both mom and pop from seed and pheno hunt, you know, for each? Or do you plan on keep the stud and just work, you know, cross it to clone every
Yeah, in this case,
next step?
okay, no, I got you now. Yeah, in this case, it'll be the latter, right? Like I already have the stud. He's in a pot. I have all the females, they're clones. And so what I may do, I'll probably end up cloning the male again just to cut him down the size, essentially. And, you know, once the females are at a sufficient enough size, flower and everything that way. But yeah, to your point, a male plant that I started from seed, even though I may clone him, and then females that will be cloned. So everything will be a clone sort of seed run. So all phenos that are tried and true.
Awesome. So how long do you think that it will be before that dream takes off?
My hope is somewhere around October. Worst case scenario, end of the year. I'm getting everything situated to get ready and start that project now. Like literally, I have the clones and whatnot. But I've read, you know, I know during when I've been doing a lot of research and reading because this is my first time doing this. And at least what I know is you want the flower to go a little longer when you're making the seeds. How long, I'm not 100% sure, but I anticipate if these are strains that normally would flower in 63 days or so, I will probably let them go 2 weeks after that for the seed making purposes. Maybe I'm off base there. I'm going to keep doing some reading as I start the project. But before the year is out, I plan to have this project, this first breeding project, completed. That is my goal and intention, and what I plan to make happen.
Oh. So how do you plan to, if you don't mind me asking, is there a method to the madness and putting together strain names? Will it be, kind of related to the crosses, or do you have alternate names in mind?
Nah, so some of it's all just random motivation, honestly. You know what? I'll share it, whatever. Doesn't matter. So one of the strain names is actually just a default Wi-Fi password that I got once that I thought was just a really cool default Wi-Fi password. Another strain name is after a very famous European city. And I'm actually genuinely shocked. I've done a lot of research on if any other strains have been named after this city, and none have, which is kind of surprising because it's a city that would seemingly be synonymous with cannabis, just given like all the snow that falls there and then like the frost associated with cannabis. But that's enough context there. And then my favorite HBO show ever is The Wire. And there's a character from The Wire whose name I think would be a cool cannabis name. And yeah, those are the three at least that I have in mind for now.
That's awesome, because now you're at least holding yourself to 3. You know what I mean? The dream takes you at least to 3.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. What do you enjoy to do outside of cannabis, or even cannabis related?
I have dogs. I'm a dog person. So I have 3 dogs. That consumes a lot of my time as well. I like traveling. I like cooking on the grill. I think my cannabis ventures have inspired me to try to get into some sort of landscape architecture just for myself. I have a pretty big backyard that looks like nothing right now, so I want to make it pretty. That's been consuming a lot of my time outside of cannabis. And generally, man, I think like most people, I've been caught up in the cryptocurrency wave. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to make some money, however easy it may be. And so, yeah, I stay pretty busy, honestly.
Sounds like it. Sounds like it. Yeah. So I guess to work off what we're talking about here, what kind of dogs? Big dogs, little dogs?
So I have an English bulldog, a boxer, and a Presica Canario. So a big dog, a medium dog, and a small dog, I guess.
Faces well covered there. Faces well covered there. Why does the little one always take the lead the pack? I'm curious about that.
Oh yeah, she's the boss. She's definitely the boss.
So I can't help but wonder as well. Say you like to travel. Do you is cannabis part of the planning these days as far as travel goes?
Mm, yes and no.
Both I
I'll
guess
say
the
like
question pertains to like if you can smoke, and is it like something like when you plan the trips, are the
well
two
to,
factors are can you smoke, and is it like pertaining to something cannabis? You know, you go to somewhere and it pertains to something cannabis.
Yeah, like Amsterdam is one of my favorite cities. I've been plenty of times, and yes, like I much prefer going somewhere where I know I can smoke and weed is easily accessible versus if it's not. Now, obviously, that won't keep me from exploring, but if it's to be considered and I have a choice, I will always defer to being able to go a place where smoking is accepted and being able and having access to smoking is easily accessible. I mean, obviously it's a little harder when you travel internationally, but most places in the US is it's not too big of a deal. But it certainly matters to me if
What are
that's what
some of
you're
your
asking.
favorite places? What are some of your favorite places you've traveled to?
Domestically, I guess some of my favorite cities, Chicago. I love Chicago. New Orleans, uh, um, Miami. And I would say just in terms of places I enjoy going, where I've had really good times, and I've been a lot of places. Uh, Internationally, I mentioned Amsterdam, which um, people don't realize it's a very cool cultural city. Like even beyond the weed aspect of it, and I like it. I like it versus other European cities because it's much smaller. So I feel like you're really able to like if you're there, for a good amount of time, you're really able to like meet people. Um, there's a smoke shop that I go to there. I remember I gone there right before COVID started, and the last time I was there was a few years beforehand. But there was a smoke shop that I went to 5 years before that, and I wasn't able to make it to the other few times I was there in between. And I went back literally 5 years later. It was 2015 to 2020, and like the guy recognized me. And one of the reasons he recognized me was it wasn't just like, oh, he recognized me after 5 years, I'm important. One of the reasons he recognized me is the first time I went in there, he told me I reminded him of his son. And he was he was a Dutch guy, a white Dutch guy, but I believe he had married a black woman. And so his kids were mixed. And he told me I reminded him of his son. And so literally 5 years later, I go in there and he recognizes me, right? But he's the owner of this smoke shop. So like I get all this free shit because he recognizes me like 5 years later, right? So I enjoy places where like you can smoke weed because for me, it ain't just like smoking weed. It's like you build relationships with people, right? Especially in places where it's socially accepted. And you're a foreigner, right? So that's why I like Amsterdam because like you go, you sit, you smoke with somebody, and they want to ask you questions. They want to learn about where you're from. They want to tell you how shitty America is, but how y'all got the best weed, right? Like, so Amsterdam's certainly my favorite international city that I've been to, and I've been a few places, but that's the place I enjoy going to most.
Mr. West.
Really good
in
restaurants
chat
too.
Says, which shop? Which shop is that? Mr.
This
Chad
shop is
Westport
called
in
this
chat.
shop. This particular shop is called Coffee Shop The Stud. Coffee Shop The Stud is what it's called. And one of the better ones.
That's on my bucket list as well to hopefully make it to Amsterdam someday. Someday. I haven't been there, but I hope to make it someday.
The best Thai food you will eat outside of Thailand is in Amsterdam. Stand by that.
Really? Really?
Mm-hmm. There was this little mom and pop
Yes.
Thai restaurant. I ate there 3 nights in a row. That's how good it was.
So I enjoy some spicy food myself. Is that why you enjoy the Thai cooking?
Oh, don't give me the talking food.
So, do you see yourself traveling anytime soon to any events?
So actually, traveling, I'm not sure. I honestly don't have any travel plans in the foreseeable future. But there is the National Cannabis Festival here in DC on August 28th, I believe, this year. So I know they didn't have it last year because of COVID, and they had postponed it this year. But it seems like with things opening up and normalizing a bit, and the restrictions easing, it's going to happen. And now hopefully it happens. I know Maryland just instituted a state of emergency because of COVID again, but that is something I'm looking forward to. I got some pretty good friends who I actually met at that event this is the 5th annual one. I think my first year growing, I went and I made some friends and people I still keep in touch with. So that should be a good time. That's something I'm actually looking forward to, though it's later in the summer. So come on down if you're not doing anything.
I need to get to some events, man. I actually believe that stuff just charges my batteries like crazy. Getting out there and talking with people, man. I absolutely love my cannabis days.
Hey man, August 28th. Mark your calendar. You should come on down.
Never know. You never know where fate take you, man. Hopefully I'll see you.
Yep.
You're always more than welcome to come up and check out the Michigan community as well.
It's funny that there was a High Times, nothing against High Times, but there was a High Times festival up there that I had tried coming to, and I made arrangements to come, and it got canceled. But no, I have some buddies in Detroit who grow, and actually, like, one of the first pages I started following when I started growing was these guys, Team Terpene, and I know they're based out of Michigan.
Yeah, yes they are. Yes, they are. Any boy, with all that beautiful flower you got on that page, have you ever thought on entering in any kind of competition?
I'd be totally down to do that. I just haven't heard of any. One of the best experiences I had when I first started this was one of the local growth stores, Cap City Organics. They hosted this little cannabis cup, and man, the way they did it was very well put together. And I imagine they ran into some logistical issues, and I imagine there is a reason why they didn't do it, because they're still doing well. They just only did it that one year. But it was at a little bar, and you go inside the bar, and they had converted it into like a little lounge space, and you could smoke. And the weeks leading up to it, they had sent a bunch of samples around to different testers. A buddy of mine at the time was a tester, so I got to try out some of the weed, and you win, and you know the votes were in, and throughout the day there were different, throughout the evening there were different prizes. But the cool part was just meeting different growers. Like I met growers who were growing in states where it's not legal to grow, okay, who heard about this event and drove up. One of this guy who I met, don't remember his name, any of that, but I remember this guy was from North Carolina, and he had drove up to DC for this event, and he had some of the best weed that I've ever smoked that he grew right down in North Carolina. He drove up just to come to this event and meet some people, right? So I want to see more of that, right? I don't think there's enough of that kind of stuff in our area. I want to see more of that. Yeah, that's something I would like to see more of, especially like in the DMV area. I don't think we have enough of that here. But to answer your question, like, yeah, I'd totally be interested in something like that.
Do you have a favorite breeder and strain?
Man, that's so hard to say. I'll say this. I have a handful of favorite breeders. Mass Medical Strains is up there, of course. Mountain Organics, they're up there. Exotic Genetics. I really like Surfer Seeds. He makes some really good genetics. In terms of favorite strain, I've smoked some really good strains. I'll say the first strain that kind of showed me I knew what I was doing was the triple chocolate chip from Exotic Genetics, which was mint chocolate chip and triple OG. I don't know, man. It's something about Mass Medical Strains Putang that I just really like. It's just a really good. It's unlike any other kind of weed I've ever smoked. And it's not just because it's purple. It's honestly like the feeling it gives me. It's one of the few strains that when I smoke it, like I feel the weed in my kneecaps, right? Like I'm laughing because it's literally how it makes me feel. Like euphoric, right? Euphoric. That's how he describes it, but it's really the truth. But that's hard. That's hard to say because, there have been some smaller breeders whose strains that I've grown. There's a local woman, 420 Girl Genetics, who's grown some really, really good strains. And if you've ever smoked some real, genuine cat piss, right? She had a strain Ferrari Diesel that reminded me of like genuine cat piss. There's a company, actually, I'm going to grow on my next run one of their strains for the first time, Third Coast Genetics, who I know they're based out of Michigan. Their pure Michigan strain, at least for me, is what's like kind of put them on the map. And again, this is back to what I said earlier about just finding something that can motivate you, right? When I was in college, back to when I first started smoking weed, one of the guys who I knew at the time, he was one of the first people to have, and I know this for a fact in hindsight, because he wasn't just anybody. He was an older gentleman. He was one of the first people with cheese. When cheese became a strain, he was one of the first people with cheese. And I was looking through Third Coast Genetics portfolio because someone I knew had grew their Pure Michigan. I really liked how it came out. And I said, I really want something to cross with the Pure Michigan. And I'm looking through all the strains that they've crossed with the Pure Michigan. And I see UK cheese. And it just brought back that feeling of, oh man, I remember smoking cheese in college 10 years ago, right? So that's one of the strains I'm gonna grow next. So I like trying new things. I really like trying new things. I like trying new stuff just as much as I like certain breeders, I'm willing to give any and everything a shot. There are a lot of breeders who I have seeds from, small guys that are already doing what it is I'm trying to do. So I support up and down the spectrum. I just like good genetics, and I think there are a lot of good genetics out there.
So many today, it's kind of hard to keep track of what's hot, but I guess that's a good thing.
It is. You just gotta go
everybody
for
smoking something new.
exactly. You just gotta go for what you like, you know.
I think we'll be in a much better place if when we meet up, pass each other, have a social lunch. If we meet up and we're smoking different strains, it'll be a sad world if we start meeting up and we're all smoking the same shit.
Agree. Agree, my man.
So, do you have a preferred intake method? Are you
Uh,
smoker?
I'm-
Do you prefer your
I smoke backwoods. I know there are people who will balk at that and judge me, but it is a preference. I will smoke a spliff from time to time. I do like a good white boy with just a little bit of tobacco in it, but I prefer my backwoods.
So, what do you think the tobacco adds to it? Do you think it's just a slower burn, or
Yeah, it's a
just
preference, I
adds
think.
something to the overall high?
I think it does, but obviously, like it adds, but it also takes away. So like whenever I'm trying to strain for the first time, I do try to like just smoke it out of a bong or a bowl, or just roll a regular white boy. But just in terms of my personal smoking preference, I just like backwoods.
Do you enjoy the edibles at all?
I do. I do. I have a buddy here who makes weed infused sugar, and I'm a big tea drinker, and so at night I tend to make a cup of tea, and I'll put a few teaspoons of this weed sugar in my tea, and that with a blunt, man, it puts me in a really good place before I go to bed. I'll say that. But yeah, though I am more of a smoker, I certainly consume edibles, and I find that like smoking backwoods, obviously it's a little more harsh than other things, and like I try to moderate my smoking, if that makes sense, as best I can. And so the edibles help in between time, especially if they're good. And I like when people get creative with it. He makes brittle. He has infused coconut oil and infused olive oil and infused Cheez-Its. He has infused Cheez-Its. They are amazing. They are amazing. Short answer is yes. I enjoy edibles as well.
I think they're necessary, to be honest with you. It's one thing to smoke, but it does the body so good. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? To ingest it as well.
Agreed. Agreed. What strains you got going right now?
I have a few strains going on.
Too
I've
many.
got, of course, some stuff I've got from Empire Breeding Co. I've got his 6-shooter, Citrus Blazer, and his Barbecue Gorilla version 2 is growing. And I have
I've never gotten
Night
anything.
Grower 1. I'm sorry,
But
go ahead.
I've never gotten anything from Empire Breeding Company, but I've seen them around. So I'll have to check them out, knowing that you are growing some of their gear.
Well, great stuff. I've been always impressed with everything I've got. But yeah, if you don't know, uh, part of Empire Breeding Co. there is Mr. Type. Mr. Type was one of the first people to start doing the YouTube and like teach growing and all that. Well, it's one of the first pioneers to actually, do the YouTube thing. And man, I still to this day use techniques that I learned from Mr. Type. So yeah, I highly suggest checking out some of his gear. Great guy, amazing grower. I had an opportunity to meet and test with him at a few events. And, yeah, can't say enough good things about Mr. Type. So I'm also growing another Michigan breeder and YouTuber friend, uh, Med Grower One. I'm growing his smash cake and garlic punch.
Hmm.
That both of those are pretty good. I've got a strain called Xmas that was given to me from Dane Grower in chat. I have another strain that was gifted to me from another person in chat, White Feather Grown, the Tiger King, which I threw that down just because of the name. And I was pleasantly surprised, man. It's a nice pine berry turd profile. Really nice. Enjoy medicated both. I've also got, what else the hell else I've got? Oh, I've got Bingus, who's probably in chat as well. His Blue Mile going in here. I have some Jack Greenstock's Velvet Punch floating around. Oh, clone that I received from Alex Hardy, Board 13. So many more. I don't write things down. I don't write things down. I just kind of keep things going by
Hey, man, it's the only way to do it.
sometimes
You're killing it. I have 5 strains in rotation, so you are miles ahead of me.
Well, I've got a few more numbers here. I'm a caregiver here in Michigan, and fully carded. So I'm allotted 72 plants.
I got
So I
you.
have a little more room to work than most.
I'm allotted 12. It's funny. It's not even, for me, the volume isn't even really the issue. I want to put more plants in to cut down on my veg time, right? Like that 4x8 grow bed that's in my profile, that's on my page, there are only 8 plants in that bed, right? And so I'm trying to sort of, having the one bed makes it challenging to keep, say, 16 clones, because at the point at which I clone, I'm having to care for those clones until they're transplanted for the next run. And so for me, my focus has been just maximizing my space, right? That's why I added the timber lights versus the other lights, to make sure the canopy was getting as much light as possible. And then the other little cutout portion of the ceiling, I added some lights there. And though I was only able to run 1 pot this run, I'll have 3 30-gallon pots the next run. So by the next run, at its full completion, that room will have the 1 4x8 grow bed, and then next to it, the 3 30-gallon pots. And that will enable me to legitimately run five strains in the room. I'll put whatever I think my 2 best yielders are side by side in the bed, half and half, in each 4x4 square, and then I'll run a strain each in the 30-gallon pots. And that'll at least enable me to have a decent amount of 5 different strains.
So have you have you noticed that each plant still retains its own terp profile strongly? Or
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Putang is the strongest. Absolutely. I'm very conscious of not, I mean, obviously some buds fall over, but I'm very conscious of not letting the plants touch. And even still, that's why it would be ideal, though I have, of the 8 plants, essentially one half of the bed is all pop art. So 4 of those plants are pop art. I have the 1 cherrygasm, the 1 indigo pupil, and then I have the 2 Putang. I think I'm going to run all 5 of these same phenos again the next run. I'm going to put the Putang and the pop art side by side in the bed. I'm going to put the cherrygasm in a pot. I'm going to put the indigo pupil in a pot. I'm going to put the Florida sunrise in a pot. In that time, I want to flower that male by itself just to see, how he flowers alone before I do the breeding project. And that's why I say, by the end of the year, because, I'll transplant those plants in the next month when I harvest, right? 4 weeks after that or so, I'll be going in the flower again and taking clones. So I will be, in theory, starting this breeding project somewhere in early October, because I want to flower the male by himself between now and then, just to see what happens, just to see how he comes out. And then, just given my time constraints right now, and space constraints, and not wanting to lose or compromise anything, I said I'm just going to run these same 5 strains once more, clone them once more, and in cloning them after that next run, doing a pheno hunt after that. Because after I take those clones, I'll be cloning them strictly to breed. I won't be keeping mothers or anything like that. All of my keeper phenos will be gone and turned into my first creations. And I'll find more keepers.
so, do you plan to breed more for terps or THC Kent?
I heard the terps part. What was the last part? I didn't quite catch it.
Do you plan to, focus when you're working on your breeding? Are you planning to focus more on terps or, strong THC?
I honestly feel like the strains that I've selected kind of offer the best of both worlds, right? Like the Florida sunrise, for example. Not the terpiest strain, but it's strong. Like it is green crack and triangle kush. And so it is, it's a puncher, right? But the pop art, by contrast, though it is a heavy yielder, and though, yeah, it's strong, right? Like, of course, it does what it's supposed to do. The terps are very distinct. Same with the Putang. So I feel like with what I'm focused on with this first breeding project, there's kind of going to be something for everybody, right? There's going to be something for everybody in there. I'm very confident in that. And so not every strain may be the terpiest, or not every strain may have the strongest THC, but I think a combination of them all are certainly going to check the boxes. And I'm confident in checking all those boxes, right? Like, I won't know till I know. I'm going to be very intentional at the point at which I actually get to a place where I am selling my genetics. Like, I'm going to make it a point to have, had seeds be tested with multiple growers and multiple different environments, right? Actually do some testing of the flower in the end. Because I know that for myself, I approach how I grow as a consumer, right? I smoke things that I like smoking, that I think other people will like smoking. And, you know, people now trust me enough to tell them what they'll like smoking, right? But I also know to go out to market and try and do something the right way, that's not enough, right? So at the point at which I feel like I've checked all the boxes that I can check on my own through all of my knowledge that's been accumulated, I think it's important that, you're able to show lab results and tell people what they're getting, right? Here's the terpene profile. Here's the THC outlook. And so that's something that I already sort of have in the works. It's really just a matter of me getting to a place where I have something that is ready to be tested, right? So I just think that's important. And beyond that, I would just want to know for myself, right? I mean, all the breeders that I respect seem to do that. And even the ones that don't, I think, have gained enough of a reputation that what they're producing is quality. But for me, being, small, new, excuse me, coming on the scene, I think the extra work is worth it, right?
Definitely. Think of what we have may not covered tonight, man. It's been a great conversation, man. I can't thank you enough for coming, man.
Hey, likewise, man.
Been,
I appreciate you reaching out to me. I appreciate you having me. I hope one day real soon our paths cross. Like I said, if you're ever in DC, please reach out. I'll certainly be a good host. And if I'm ever in your neck of the woods, I'll certainly do the same.
I'd be offended if you didn't.
And
I'd, so
we'll keep in touch.
a couple other things before you go, my friend.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
I'd like to go over with you. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the channel or the show or what goes on here. But I guess I'm going to give you a little bit of rundown, my friend. So basically, what I do here nightly is try to find some amazing growers like yourself that I either know or find one way or another. A lot of times people suggest great growers like yourself, or sometimes I just happen to stumble on them and find people like yourselves. But basically, I try to spotlight some great people in the community and to let other people find out about what you're doing and help send your journey a little more forward. But so when the spotlight ends, uh, there's another show that picks up, which is the wormhole, and the wormhole is open to all past guests, which includes you now. So please keep that invitation that I sent you, that Zoom link.
Yeah.
It's always good, and you're always welcome. Basically, the wormhole, it's all past guest. Conversation can vary from night to night to maybe nothing cannabis but funny to all cannabis breeding, whatever. It varies from night to night. But please, check in, tell us what you're doing, uh, don't be a stranger. The more the
Oh, no,
merrier.
no.
It helps keep the show rolling.
I appreciate you inviting me into the community, and I'll certainly be active. So no, you can count on me for that for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And the other thing that I would like to get from you, my friend, is a silly thing that I call the soundbite. Just a way for me to kind of remember the show and, put up as an advertisement of what we're doing here tonight. So basically, in my words, my version, it would go something like this. Hey, this is Eagle, and I'm on fucking Talking Shit with Eagle, episode 419. What you throw on before or after that is completely up to you, but that's the the base of what I'm looking for. I'm gonna go ahead and hit record because this is like, if I don't cut this out, then I gotta go back and splice it out. So it's easier just to record this out. So
No, you good.
I'm ready. I'm ready anytime you are, my friend.
Let's do it.
I'm ready.
All right, so this is fucking Talking Shit with Eagle. I'm Charm City
Yes, sir.
Organics. Check my man out. Great guy, great knowledge, great community builder right here. I'm humble for you having me, and great to be a part of your community, brother.
And you're going to be an awesome addition, I can tell for sure. People love organics, and you seem to have it down. And thank you for sharing your recipe, your technique, and letting us peek in a little bit on what you do. And we are, if you go back and watch this episode, you'll be able to see all the amazing and nice things they've said about you all throughout this episode. So hopefully you do, man. And as you can see, you're already welcome. You're already been welcomed here. So hopefully we do see more of.
Awesome, dude. Thank you, man.
Well, thanks again, and you have a great night. And man, time's one of the most valuable things we have. And thank you again for donating a few hours of your time.
No, seriously, thank you for having me. Seriously, it's an honor to be here. So I appreciate you. Seriously.
All right, man. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wind this thing up and get ready to start the wormhole. And you're always welcome. That invitation starts tonight, man. Things get fired up and you get interested and want to pop in. Invitation starts tonight. So thanks again. And don't be a stranger, my friend.
All right, brother.
All right. That wraps up episode 419. It has been a great episode. Please share this episode, tell a friend, and get something to drink, stretch your legs, and I'll see you guys in a few minutes in the wormhole. Thanks again, Charm City Organics. You guys know the deal. Please do something nice for somebody. Random acts of kindness do save lives. I'll see you guys in a few. We are out of here. Thanks again, Charm City. Have a great night. Peace.